He had power, wealth, and a name that was known in boardrooms, but none of it prepared Ethan Carlyle for the moment a 12-year-old boy returned his lost briefcase. That single act of honesty landed him on a park bench, hand in hand with the kids who would change his life forever. Before we begin, leave a comment below and let us know where you are watching from so we can say hello. Now, let's get into the story. Ethan Carlyle wasn't just any billionaire. He was the name behind half the smart tech running America's biggest cities, subway systems that anticipated human behavior, traffic lights that adjusted to ambulance sirens, even elevators that spoke 13 languages. At just 44, he'd built an empire from the dusty corner of a garage to a glass-walled tower in San Francisco that kissed the clouds. The press called him a genius. His board called him unstoppable. But lately, Ethan felt something hollow inside, a silence money couldn't fill. He wore tailored suits and silk ties every day, the strain and exhaustion in his eyes after shareholder meetings, and he had just completed a hard-fought deal in Chicago that added $800 million to his portfolio. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt paralyzed. After the negotiations were over, he had plans for himself. A week's vacation to a small town called Silver Grove. This time he wasn't dressed like the man on the cover of Forbes magazine. No navy suit, no silk tie. Just jeans, a faded black hoodie, and sunglasses that half hid the tiredness in his eyes. When his private jet landed at Silver Grove, he grabbed his bag. He didn't tell anyone, not even his assistant. For once, he wanted to disappear into the unknown. There was no security. No car waiting. He walked down the runway alone, hailed an old yellow taxi, and told the driver simply, "I want to go to a hotel somewhere downtown." Ethan Carlyle said. And the taxi driver took Ethan to a 5-star hotel located right in the center as he wanted. Ethan got out of the car. He did not pay immediately but asked the driver to wait for him for a short time. He entered the hotel, completed the check-in procedure and came back with a briefcase in his hand. He got into the taxi that was waiting for him in front of the hotel. The driver glanced at Ethan through the rearview mirror and nodded slightly. "Where to, sir?" he asked in a warm, steady voice. "Just around here," Ethan replied, glancing at the crowded streets. "I want to see the real Silver Grove." The man chuckled. "I see, sir." The driver was a middle-aged man with deep wrinkles and kind eyes. As the taxi rolled down narrow streets lined with small shops and old brick houses, the driver struck up a conversation. "My name is Miguel," the driver said. Then he told stories about the bakery that still used his grandmother's recipes. About the old train bells that rang out in the center of town every New Year's Eve. Ethan listened, strangely comforted by the simplicity of it all. For once, no boardroom talk. No screens. Just the rhythm of the road, and a man who spoke like the town itself, steady, honest, unpolished. He didn't realize it then, but that quiet ride with a soft-spoken taxi driver was about to become the most important detour of his year. And somewhere between the laughter of children playing in a nearby park and the hum of small-town life, Ethan began to feel something unfamiliar in his chest: peace. Just a man. Just a town. Just a moment. But it was real. The taxi rolled steadily through the winding streets of Silver Grove, the late afternoon sun painting gold streaks across the windshield. Ethan Carlyle sat in the back seat, arms crossed, gaze distant. Normally, he wasn't one for small talk. Especially not with strangers. But something about the quiet humility in Miguel's voice broke through the billionaire's usual shell. "My son Lucas is 12, Miguel said, adjusting the rearview mirror with one hand. "He loves building things. Says he's going to be an engineer one day." There was a softness in his tone, pride laced with fatigue. Ethan glanced up. "That so?" Miguel nodded. "Yeah. I do 2 jobs. Drive taxis in the day, clean offices at night. Not easy with 4 kids." 4. Ethan asked, surprised. Miguel chuckled quietly. Triplets. 6 years old. 2 girls, Isla and Rosa, and 1 boy, Mateo. They're a handful. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. He stared out the window, the edges of his expression softening. I was raised by a single mom, he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. My dad died when I was 9. She worked nights too. Cleaning houses. She used to fall asleep sitting up at the kitchen table. Miguel didn't reply right away. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was heavy with understanding. She must have been strong, Miguel said eventually. She was, Ethan replied, his throat tightening. She taught me everything I needed to know. About grit. About not giving up. The meter ticked forward. The city outside blurred. Inside the cab, 2 men from very different worlds connected, not through money or power, but through the quiet, invisible weight of responsibility and love. The sky over Silvergrove was dipped in soft afternoon gold when the taxi slowed to a stop in front of the quaint local diner. The sign read Daisy's Grill, its neon lights flickering weakly under the weight of age and sun. Ethan Carlyle stepped out of the back seat, distracted by a buzz on his smartwatch. He barely looked up as he murmured, "Thank you," and handed Miguel a generous wad of cash, more than enough to cover the fare. Miguel opened his mouth to say something, perhaps a goodbye or a blessing, but Ethan had already turned away, lost in his thoughts, his polished Oxfords tapping briskly toward the entrance. In the flurry of messages, calendar alerts, and the faint ringing of distant business calls, Ethan didn't notice what was left behind. In the back seat of the old yellow cab, resting against the worn leather, was a black leather satchel. Sleek, custom-stitched, and stamped with subtle gold initials, EC. Inside it were objects that would send most people into a panic: a silver tablet containing confidential corporate documents, multiple high-limit credit cards, a hefty roll of crisp cash, and his driver's license, along with access to nearly everything he owned. And he didn't realize any of it was gone. Back at the Rivera home on the edge of town, Miguel pulled into the gravel driveway just as the sun dipped behind the hills. His taxi engine sighed to a halt. Inside the modest one-bedroom home, Lucas was trying to keep his younger siblings, 6-year-old triplets named Isla, Rosa, and Mateo, busy with coloring books and peanut butter sandwiches. The 3 of them squealed when they saw the headlights sweep across the living room curtains. "Poppy's home," shouted Mateo, darting to the door with his sisters tumbling after him. Lucas opened the cab door before his dad could even step out. "Hey, you need help unloading anything?" Miguel chuckled tiredly. "Only thing I brought home is hunger." The clock on the kitchen wall ticked past 7:30 p.m. as the sun dipped behind the low hills of Silvergrove. The air was thick with the scent of fried rice and worn leather. In the small garage behind their modest home, 12-year-old Lucas Rivera crouched in the back seat of his father's taxi, wiping down the seats with a damp rag. It was his evening chore, his way of earning extra pocket money. His triplet siblings, Isla, Rosa, and Mateo, were tumbling around the yard, their laughter spilling through the open garage door like sunlight after a storm. Rosa chased Mateo with a plastic dinosaur while Isla tried to braid strands of grass into a bracelet. Lucas shook his head with a quiet smile. He reached under the driver's seat to sweep up some bread crumbs and candy wrappers when something hard brushed against his fingers. He slowly pulled it out, a black leather briefcase, smooth and expensive-looking, the kind only people on television seemed to carry. He frowned when he saw the initials EC embossed in gold in the corner, subtle, but shining under the garage lights like a small crown. "Daddy," the boy called instinctively. "Did someone leave something in the car?" Miguel stuck his head out of the garage door, drying his hands on a dish towel. Lucas held up the briefcase. Miguel's eyes widened slightly. "It's that man's," Miguel whispered. Lucas opened it carefully. Inside, neatly arranged, was a tablet, several platinum credit cards, a stack of tightly folded $100 bills, and a glossy business card that read, Ethan Carlisle, founder and CEO, Nexlux Technologies. For a moment, the world around Miguel froze. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This man had been sitting right there, behind him, just hours ago. He remembered the man's calm voice, the tailored jacket, the deep eyes that seemed non-judgmental. And now, his entire identity, and a small fortune, was in Lucas's hands. Behind him, Mateo tugged at his shirt. "What is it, Lucas?" "A briefcase," he said, his voice soft. "Is it magic?" Rosa asked, eyes wide as she peeked at the gold lettering. Lucas gave a shaky laugh. "No, Rosa. But it could be trouble." He looked up at his father again. Miguel walked over, took the wallet gently, and looked inside. Then, after a long pause, he handed it back. "You found it, Mijo. What do you think we should do?" Lucas stared down at the wallet in his lap. His stomach turned a little at the weight of what he held. He thought about the rent being late, the worn soles on his sneakers, and the way Isla's coat sleeves barely covered her wrists anymore. But then he looked over at his siblings, now sitting cross-legged together in the grass, giggling at their pretend tea party. "We give it back," Lucas said quietly. "It doesn't belong to us." Miguel smiled, pride softening the tired lines around his eyes. "Good choice, son. Let's go find Mr. Carlisle." Miguel glanced at the time. He was exhausted from a long day of driving, and the kids hadn't eaten dinner yet, but one look at his eldest son's earnest eyes made the decision for him. "All right," he said, scooping up Rosa in one arm as she reached for his leg. "Let's go." Within minutes, they were back on the road. The diner Ethan had been dropped off at sat near the town's main square, quiet, cozy, and still glowing with string lights in the windows. As the taxi pulled up, Lucas jumped out first, wallet clutched tightly in his hand, scanning for any sign of the man in the dark blazer. Miguel followed with the triplets in tow. "Stay close," he said softly as Isla clung to Mateo's hand and Rosa clutched the hem of his shirt. Lucas pushed open the door to the diner. The scent of grilled onions and fresh pie wafted out to greet them, but the man they were looking for was nowhere in sight. "Excuse me," Lucas asked the waitress behind the counter, his voice almost too soft to hear. "Was a man sitting here earlier? Tall, dark suit?" His name was Ethan Carlisle. She glanced up from refilling salt shakers. "Oh, him? Yeah, he paid in cash and left maybe 20 minutes ago. Said he was heading back to his hotel, Rosehill Inn, I think." Lucas's heart sank. "We just missed him." Miguel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You tried, Mijo. We'll find him." Behind them, the triplets tugged gently on Lucas's shirt. "Is he nice?" Mateo asked. Lucas nodded slowly, determination lighting in his eyes. "Nice enough to deserve his wallet back. We're not stopping here." Miguel smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "Then let's go find him, I know where he is." And just like that, the family turned toward the next destination, united by honesty, driven by heart. The chase for a forgotten wallet was now a journey toward something much bigger. Ethan Carlisle had just begun to unwind after a long, unexpected day in Silver Grove. He loosened his tie and sank into the armchair in his modest hotel suite, his thoughts drifting to the quiet simplicity of the town, so unlike the steel and glass chaos of San Francisco. But a knock at the door interrupted the silence. He frowned, not expecting visitors. When he opened the door, the sight before him made him pause. Standing in the hallway was the taxi driver from earlier, Miguel Rivera, his shirt soaked with sweat, his eyes kind but tired. Next to him was a tall, slim boy, maybe 12, with messy hair, old sneakers, and a determined look in his eyes. The boy held something in his hand, a shiny black leather briefcase. And around the boy's legs clung three small children, 2 girls and a boy, all about 6, with identical golden curls and wide brown eyes full of nervous curiosity. One of the girls clutched a fraying stuffed rabbit. The other had a hand wrapped tightly around her brother's. They peeked out shyly from behind Lucas, their presence unexpected and heartbreaking all at once. "Mr. Carlyle?" Miguel said, his voice soft. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late. My son found this in the back seat." Lucas stepped forward, holding the briefcase in both hands as if it were a sacred object. "Sir," he said, his voice calm despite the gravity of the moment, "I believe you left it in our taxi this morning." Ethan blinked, startled, and then he recognized his bag. He looked at the bag, then at the boy. "You came all the way here, to return it to me?" he asked slowly. Lucas nodded. "It didn't belong to us." Ethan took the bag from the boy, his fingers brushing the calluses on Lucas's palms. The weight of the bag was nothing compared to the weight of what the child had just done. "You could have kept it," Ethan murmured. Miguel's voice was firm but gentle. "We don't teach our kids that. Especially not these 4. Life's been hard, but we still have our name. And our values." Isla, the boldest of the triplets, stepped forward and whispered, "Lucas said the man who owned it looked sad. Like he needed it back." Ethan swallowed a lump rising in his throat. He crouched to eye level with the kids. "Do you know what you did, Lucas? You reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago, what real honesty looks like." Mateo looked up and asked innocently, "Are you a prince or something?" Ethan laughed, the sound breaking through the tightness in his chest. "Not quite. But tonight, I feel like I met 4 angels." He looked up at Miguel. "Please, come in. All of you. Let me say thank you properly." And for the first time in a long while, Ethan's hotel room was filled not with silence, but with laughter, warmth, and something dangerously close to hope. Ethan Carlyle had eaten in some of the world's most luxurious restaurants, from rooftop lounges in Dubai to private cellars in Napa Valley. But that evening, seated at a small corner table in the Rosehill Inn's modest dining room, something felt different. He had insisted that Miguel and Lucas stay. And when Lucas hesitated, 3 little heads peeked shyly from behind their father's legs. "These are my younger ones," Miguel said with a chuckle, gently nudging them forward. "Triplets, Isla, Rosa, and Mateo. They're 6. The 2 girls wore matching purple jackets with patches at the elbows, while Mateo held a toy car so worn the wheels barely turned. They climbed into the booth like it was an adventure, eyes wide at the cloth napkins and flickering candlelight. Ethan smiled, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. "Hope you guys like grilled cheese and tomato soup. It's our favorite." Rosa chirped, swinging her legs under the table. The waitress returned with warm plates, and the table filled with laughter, interrupted by occasional slurps and giggles as the kids dipped triangles of sandwich into their bowls. Lucas sat beside Ethan, quieter than the others, but his eyes flicked toward the billionaire every now and then, still trying to make sense of the moment. "So, Lucas," Ethan said, sipping his water, "I meant it earlier. That was a good thing you did." Lucas shrugged, then glanced at his siblings. "They look up to me. I didn't want to do something that would make them think being dishonest was okay, even if we could have used the money." Miguel lowered his spoon slowly. "We've had hard times, Mr. Carlyle. But I've always told my kids, what you have doesn't define you. What you do does." Ethan leaned back, his eyes glossing slightly. He hadn't expected this. A taxi ride, a forgotten wallet, and now, this warmth. This honesty. This family who had nothing but shared everything. "I've sat through dinners with CEOs worth billions," he murmured, almost to himself, "and none of them ever made me feel like this." Ethan glanced at Miguel and asked hesitantly, "So where is your wife, the mother of the children?" Miguel was silent for a moment, sadness evident in his eyes when he heard the question. "She died giving birth to 3 children, difficult labor and too much blood loss, Miguel's voice choked up. Ethan felt his chest tighten. I'm sorry for making you remember that pain, Ethan said softly. The room was in silence until Rosa broke it. She reached for another napkin but accidentally spilled the juice. It spilled all over the table, running down Ethan's lap. Oh no, she gasped, panicked. But Ethan laughed, grabbing napkins to help. Don't worry, Rosa. It's just juice. Happens to the best of us. She looked up at him, wide-eyed. You're not mad? Not even a little, he replied. You remind me of someone I used to know, someone I miss very much. Mateo leaned over and offered Ethan half of his sandwich. You can have this if you're still hungry. Ethan took it, holding back a breath. He hadn't expected a meal like this, simple food, innocent laughter, raw humanity. And in that unassuming inn, surrounded by 4 kids and their exhausted father, something shifted in his chest. It's not just about a briefcase anymore. It's about finding something he didn't know he lost. As the waitress cleared away the grilled cheese and empty soup bowls, Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His gaze fell on Lucas, who was gently wiping Rosa's chin with a napkin. The boy's movements were mature, careful, far beyond his years. You know, Ethan said, his voice softer than usual, a lot of kids would take that bag and call it a lucky day. Lucas looked up, his expression serious. It doesn't feel right. I trusted your dad enough to go with him, and when your mom was alive, doing the right thing meant more when no one was watching. Ethan stared at the boy for a moment, then smiled slightly. Your mom seemed like a wise woman. Lucas's expression wavered slightly. He nodded and said softly, I miss her. There was a brief silence, heavy and respectful. Ethan cleared his throat gently. I'm sorry to hear that. Miguel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Lucas stepped up more than any child should have had to. Helps with the kids, gets them to school, even watches them when I'm working late. Lucas looked embarrassed by the praise, his gaze dropping to his lap. Mateo suddenly poked him with his elbow and whispered, Tell him about your bridges. Rosa chimed in with a sing-song voice, Yeah. Lou wants to build Baiig bridges. Lucas flushed. Ethan chuckled. Bridges, huh? He leaned in slightly. Tell me, Lucas, what do you want to be when you grow up? Lucas hesitated, then raised his head, something sparking in his eyes. An engineer, he said, his voice steady. One of those people who design cities, build bridges over rivers, or make sure buildings don't fall when storms hit. Isla puffed up proudly. He drew a whole city in his notebook. With little buses and schools and even a park. Lucas laughed, embarrassed again, but there was a gleam of pride in his eyes. Ethan nodded slowly. That's an incredible dream. Lucas's fingers traced the rim of his glass. It feels far away sometimes, but I like to think if I work hard enough, maybe one day I'll be part of something bigger. Something that helps people. Like the engineers who build the roads we drive on, or the ones who design clean water systems. I don't want to just exist. I want to make things better. Ethan swallowed hard. The boy wasn't asking for money. He wasn't making a pitch or angling for anything. He was just dreaming. Honestly, openly, despite a life of hardship. And somehow, that moved Ethan more than any boardroom speech ever had. Rosa climbed onto Lucas's lap with zero ceremony, wrapping her arms around his neck. Lou says one day we can live in a house with our own bathroom. And no ceiling leaks when it rains. Ethan laughed, but something caught in his throat. His penthouse had 6 bathrooms. He hadn't even thought about ceiling leaks in years. Do you think I could see this notebook of yours sometime? He asked gently. Lucas nodded eagerly. It's kind of beat up, but yeah, I'd love to show you. Just then, a server arrived with a complimentary dessert, 4 tiny scoops of vanilla ice cream with rainbow sprinkles. The triplets squealed in delight, immediately squabbling over who got the biggest mountain. Miguel chuckled, shaking his head. They do that every time. As the children laughed and the warmth of the diner wrapped around them like a blanket, Ethan couldn't help but feel it, the ache in his chest, unfamiliar but welcome. He had everything, jets, boardrooms, millions in the bank, but this? This table full of joy, of hope born from nothing? It was something he had forgotten even existed. He looked at Lucas again, and what he saw wasn't just a boy who returned a wallet. It was a future waiting to be shaped. A mind that wanted to build, to create, to lift others up. And for the first time in years, Ethan Carlyle didn't see a transaction or an investment. He saw potential. Pure, unpolished, and full of light. He leaned back, watching the triplets feed each other spoonfuls of melting ice cream and Lucas quietly planning how to clean up their mess. You know, Ethan said, smiling, I think the world needs more bridge builders like you. Lucas grinned, eyes sparkling. Then I guess I better keep drawing. That night, Ethan Carlyle sat on the edge of his hotel bed in his dimly lit room, staring at the unopened leather briefcase he'd almost lost forever. The leather was smooth under his fingertips, the embossed gold initials on the front catching the soft light of the nightlight. It should have been just another object, just another thing, but somehow it seemed heavier now. More meaningful. He let out a long breath and leaned back against the headboard, eyes drifting to the ceiling. The silence of the room pressed in. Normally, after long business trips, he'd fall asleep in seconds. But tonight was different. Tonight, something inside him wouldn't rest. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy, Lucas. Just 12 years old, yet with a gaze older than most men Ethan had ever hired. There was strength in his voice when he said, "It didn't belong to us." No excuses. No hesitation. Just simple, unwavering honesty. And the father, Miguel. A man who hadn't said much, but whose actions had spoken volumes. Instead of keeping the wallet or pretending not to see it, they'd spent hours tracking him down across the small town, never asking for a reward. Never even suggesting compensation. They had chosen what was right over what was easy. But what truly clutched Ethan's heart, what kept sleep away, was the way Lucas's 3 younger siblings had huddled in the back seat of that same dusty taxi when they arrived at the hotel. He hadn't noticed them at first. But then a small voice had asked shyly, "Is this the fancy building, Lucas?" And when the door opened wider, Ethan had caught sight of them, 3 tiny figures, wide-eyed, curious, and clearly close in age. Twins, he had thought at first. But no. They were triplets. 2 little girls with honey blonde braids and matching flower patches on their jackets, Isla and Rosa. And a boy with tousled hair and deep brown eyes, quieter than the others, Mateo. All around 6 years old, clinging to each other for warmth and reassurance. Lucas had immediately turned, whispering something comforting to them, and Ethan had seen how naturally the boy became a protector, a guide. Barely a child himself, yet already a caretaker. That image, Lucas leading his siblings up the hotel steps, one hand on Isla's shoulder, Rosa gripping his coat, and Mateo trailing behind, burned itself into Ethan's mind. He got up, walked to the window, and looked down at the sleepy streets of Silver Grove. The street lamps bathed the road in a gentle amber haze. Somewhere in a modest house not far away, 4 children were likely sharing a blanket on a single mattress, their father sitting nearby counting dollars to stretch over the next week. And yet, those children knew more about integrity than half the executives in his boardroom. How? How did people with so little raise children with so much honor? Ethan walked back to the desk, sat down, and opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Then, without fully understanding why, he began to type. Not emails. Not business projections. But thoughts, honest, unfiltered thoughts. Today, I met a boy named Lucas Rivera. He's 12. He found my wallet in the back of his father's taxi. He could have kept it. But he didn't. Instead, he returned it to a stranger wearing a $1,000 suit and a watch that could pay for their rent for 6 months. He gave it back like it was the only choice he had. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He paused. His fingers trembled slightly. He continued. Lucas has 3 younger siblings. Triplets. Isla, Rosa, and Mateo. I watched them share a bag of crackers while their father stood awkwardly in my hotel doorway. I watched Lucas calm them when they looked nervous. I watched a child become a leader, because life forced him to. What would I have done at 12, in his shoes? Would I have chosen honesty if I had 3 little mouths to feed and no heat in my apartment? I don't know. Ethan sat back. His throat tightened. In his life, he had built companies, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and made powerful people kneel in conference rooms. But somehow, a boy from a working-class family in a forgotten town had shaken his core in a way he hadn't felt in years. He glanced toward the nightstand. The wallet sat there, unchanged. But now it was more than a thing. It was a symbol. A reminder. Of who he had been. Of who he still wanted to be. His eyes drifted back to the screen. He typed again. Lucas didn't just return a briefcase. He returned something I didn't even realize I had lost, my belief that there was still good in this world. He saved the document, unsure if he'd ever show it to anyone. But one thing was clear, something had shifted inside him. Ethan Carlisle wasn't going to forget that night. Or that family. He closed his laptop, turned off the lamp, and lay down. Still, he didn't sleep. But this time, it wasn't restlessness. It was purpose. Something was beginning. And it started with a 12-year-old boy, a forgotten wallet, and 3 little siblings who smiled with the kind of hope money could never buy. It had been 2 days since Lucas had returned Ethan Carlisle's lost briefcase to him. Life had returned to its usual pace for the Rivera household, but something was different. The night after they returned the briefcase, Miguel put his children to bed with a peace he hadn't felt in years. Lucas, his oldest at 12, had fallen asleep with a small smile still on his lips. His triplet siblings, 6-year-old Isla, Rosa, and Mateo, snored softly in their shared bunk beds across the small room of their modest apartment. The cramped space still smelled of warm tortillas and fresh laundry, and Miguel sat in the kitchen with the lights off, just listening to their breathing. The family didn't have much, barely enough to cover rent, food, and school supplies, but they had each other. And after what had happened with Mr. Carlisle, Miguel felt the fragile threads of dignity binding their lives had been stitched tighter, made stronger by his son's integrity. He didn't expect anything to come from it. Returning the wallet had never been about rewards. He had raised Lucas to know right from wrong, no matter how tempting life might be. But on that quiet Thursday morning, everything changed. Miguel was returning from his early taxi shift. He'd been driving since 4 a.m., when his phone rang. The number on the screen was unknown, but the area code was from California. He hesitated, wiping the sweat from his brow before answering. Hello? A crisp, professional female voice responded. Good morning. Is this Mr. Miguel Rivera? Yes, this is Miguel, he replied cautiously. This is Natalie from the office of Mr. Ethan Carlisle. Mr. Carlisle has asked me to reach out to you directly. He would like to invite you and your children to San Francisco for the weekend. All expenses will be covered, and travel arrangements have already been prepared. He has something he wishes to discuss with you in person. Miguel gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, his knees almost giving out. San Francisco? Are you sure you have the right number? Yes, sir. Mr. Carlisle specifically mentioned your son Lucas. He was quite moved by your family's honesty. He hopes to see you all this weekend. Miguel's throat went dry. All of us? He asked, his eyes flicking toward the room where his children were now awake, giggling faintly over a bowl of cereal. Yes, Mr. Rivera. You, Lucas, and the triplets, Isla, Rosa, and Mateo. Miguel didn't remember hanging up. He just stood there, stunned, the silence in the kitchen roaring louder than any city street. When he told the children, their reactions were what you'd expect. Lucas's eyes widened. You mean, the Mr. Carlyle? He wants to see us again. Isla, always the curious one, piped up with a giggle, does that mean we get to fly in an airplane? Mateo's spoon clattered into his cereal bowl. Do they have roller coasters in San Francisco? Rosa, the shyest of the three, blinked and whispered, is he mad we took too long to return his wallet? Miguel crouched down in front of them and smiled. No, Mija. He's not mad. He's grateful. And I think he just wants to see the kind of people who did the right thing when no one was watching. That night, as Miguel packed their worn suitcases, Lucas helped his little siblings choose their best clothes. There wasn't much to pick from. Isla's favorite yellow dress was faded at the hem, and Mateo's tiny sneakers had duct tape over one sole, but they made the most of it. Rosa insisted on bringing her crayon drawing of their family, just in case Mr. Carlyle wants to hang it up in his office. Miguel called his boss to ask for the weekend off. The dispatcher laughed in disbelief but agreed. You're meeting a billionaire? Damn, Miguel. Maybe you should ask him to fix our company cars too. By the time they reached the small regional airport, the family was buzzing with nervous excitement. Lucas carried the one small backpack with all their essentials, snacks, a book, coloring pencils, and a printed photo of their mother who had passed when the triplets were only one. A private jet awaited them. Miguel had never even seen one up close, let alone been invited to board one. The pilot smiled warmly and knelt in front of the triplets. We've got cookies on board and movies. You all ready to fly? Mateo looked up at his father. Are we gonna sit in the sky, Papa? Miguel's voice trembled. Yes, hijo. We're going to sit in the sky. Once aboard, the children marveled at the plush leather seats and soft blankets. Isla pressed her face to the window the whole time, pointing out clouds and naming them. Rosa sat next to Lucas and held his hand during takeoff, her eyes wide. Miguel, meanwhile, stared out the window in disbelief, his thoughts racing. He didn't know what Ethan Carlyle wanted to talk about. He only knew that somehow his son's decision to return the briefcase had helped his family escape the darkness, at least for a moment. And whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The airplane wheels screeched softly as they touched down on the tarmac of San Francisco International Airport. Lucas gripped the armrest tightly, eyes wide as the skyline came into view through the window. His heart thumped with excitement and nerves. This wasn't just a visit, it was the beginning of something none of them could have imagined. Miguel placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder and offered a warm, reassuring smile. We're here, Mijo. Everything's going to be okay. In the row behind them, 3 small faces peered between the seat gaps. The 6-year-old triplets, Isla, Rosa, and Mateo, bounced with curiosity and energy, their identical golden curls glinting under the cabin lights. Though they were all dressed in second-hand sweaters and mismatched shoes, they looked like sunlight wrapped in joy. The flight attendants had fawned over them the entire ride. As the family walked through the arrivals terminal, they spotted a professionally dressed young woman holding a sign that read, Rivera Family. She approached with a kind smile. Hi. I'm Andrea. I work for Mr. Carlyle. Welcome to San Francisco. Miguel looked around in awe. He'd never been in a city this size. Lucas held on to his youngest sister Rosa's hand, while Isla climbed into Miguel's arms without asking. Mateo dragged his backpack, which held nothing more than a few crayons, a coloring book, and his lucky toy car. They didn't bring much, they didn't own much, but their spirits were full. A sleek black SUV was waiting outside. As they drove through the city, passing glass towers and bustling streets, Lucas pressed his forehead against the window, whispering, "So this is where Mr. Carlyle lives." Andrea turned back with a soft laugh. "Well, sort of. You'll see." When they arrived at the headquarters of Carlyle Innovations, Miguel froze in place. The building stretched into the sky like it had no end, glass, steel, and sunlight bouncing off its sleek edges. It looked like something from the future. Inside, a team was waiting to greet them. Everyone wore matching navy lanyards with badges and smiles that didn't seem forced. "We've been expecting you," said a tall man in a suit as he bent slightly to greet the triplets. "Are you Isla? Or Rosa? You all look like a rainbow just walked in." Isla grinned proudly. "I'm Isla. She's Rosa. That's Mateo. He likes race cars." Mateo nodded seriously, holding up his scuffed toy. "Virum." Lucas stood a little behind them, unsure where he belonged in this world of polished shoes and elevator chimes. Then the doors opened with a soft ding, and Ethan Carlyle himself stepped out. His presence was subtle but commanding, no entourage, no fanfare. He wore a charcoal gray sweater and jeans instead of a suit. When he saw Lucas, his face broke into a smile. "There he is," Ethan said, striding forward and kneeling to meet the boy eye to eye. "The honest young man who reminded me what integrity looks like." Lucas flushed red, then instinctively stepped forward and gave him a tight hug. "Thank you, sir, for everything." Ethan stood and shook Miguel's hand. "You raised a remarkable son, Mr. Rivera. I'm honored to have your family here." Miguel's eyes misted. We're just grateful you remembered us at all." "I never forgot," Ethan said. He led them into an elevator that rose with a gentle hum to the 27th floor. When the doors opened, they stepped into a world that looked like something out of a science fiction film. The floor was a design lab, vast, open, filled with holographic screens, moving robotic arms, and workstations humming with energy. "This is where the future is born," Ethan said proudly. Lucas's jaw dropped. Engineers in lab coats and jeans walked briskly past, adjusting circuits, speaking in terms he didn't quite understand, yet. One wall was covered in concept maps and diagrams of city systems, solar-powered traffic lights, self-cleaning streets, water-purifying parks. Rosa gasped as a small spherical robot rolled by and greeted her with a chirpy, "Hello." She squealed and clutched Mateo's hand, who gave chase laughing. Isla stared at a drone hovering in place, eyes wide with wonder. Lucas slowly walked over to a touchscreen displaying a 3D model of a smart city. He reached out tentatively and touched it. The city rotated under his fingertips. Roads shifted, lights blinked, data danced across the screen. For the first time, he didn't feel like a poor boy from a broken taxi. He felt like someone who could belong in this world. Ethan watched him closely. "This place is meant to inspire the curious," he said quietly to Miguel. "Lucas reminds me of myself at that age, except he's already more grounded than I ever was." Miguel smiled, his eyes following his son with pride. "He's always been special. Always wanted to understand how things worked. He fixes radios back home." "He'll do more than that now," Ethan replied, a fire of conviction in his voice. After the tour, Ethan brought the family to a lounge overlooking the bay. A table had been set with warm meals, grilled cheese, spaghetti, chicken nuggets for the kids, and something Miguel couldn't even pronounce. The kids dug in, giggling and dipping everything into ketchup. "So what do you think of San Francisco?" Ethan asked as he poured juice for the triplets. "It's like another planet," Lucas admitted, holding a cup of apple juice with both hands. "But I want to stay. I want to learn everything." "That's what I was hoping to hear." As the sun began to set outside the window, casting golden light over the bay, Ethan watched the Rivera children huddled around the robot again, laughing, their tiny shoes tapping against the sleek white floors. It was a sound he hadn't heard in too long, pure, innocent joy. Lucas turned and caught Ethan's gaze. "Sir, one day, I want to build something that helps other kids like us." Ethan smiled. "You already have. You reminded one man that honesty still exists. That changed more than you'll ever know." In that moment, Ethan realized that the boy hadn't just returned a wallet, he had returned something far more valuable. Faith. And a future worth building. It's a quiet morning at Carlisle Tech headquarters on Monday, as hundreds of employees gather in the central lobby. This is no ordinary Monday. Rumors are swirling. Billionaire founder Ethan Carlisle is about to make a public appearance, and something big is about to happen. Near the front stood Lucas's small family, dressed casually and a little overwhelmed. Miguel Rivera wore his only shirt, the collar frayed but freshly pressed. Lucas stood nearby, fidgeting, holding the hands of his younger siblings, Isla, Rosa, and Mateo, who were more concerned with the shiny floor than with why so many people were staring at them. Lucas squeezed their hands tighter. "Stay close," he whispered, gently pulling Rosa back as she tried to chase a ray of sunlight dancing on the marble tiles. They looked so small in that vast building of glass and chrome, so out of place. Yet they were exactly where they needed to be. From the upper level, a hush fell as Ethan Carlisle stepped to the railing above the atrium. His navy suit was sharp, his voice calm and clear through the microphone. "Good morning," he began, eyes scanning the crowd until they found Lucas below. "I want to share a story with you all, one that reminded me why I started this company in the first place." He paused, letting the silence settle. "A few days ago, I left something important behind, my wallet, in a taxi in a small town called Silver Grove. It wasn't just about money. It was about identity, about trust. But more than anything, it was about what happened next." He gestured toward Lucas and his family. "That wallet was returned to me by a boy, 12 years old, who could have chosen differently. Who could have pocketed the cash, looked away, walked on. But he didn't." Lucas looked up, startled. Ethan was speaking about him, really speaking about him, in front of all these strangers. He felt heat rush to his cheeks, but the firm grip of his father's hand steadied him. And Isla giggled, unaware of the weight of the moment, tugging at Lucas's shirt and whispering, "That's you. He's talking about you." Ethan descended the staircase slowly, his voice filled with warmth. "Meet Lucas Rivera," he said, coming to stand beside the boy. "One day, he'll help change the world. And today, we're giving him a scholarship and mentorship to make that happen." A hush fell over the room, then erupted into applause. Loud. Joyful. Echoing. Lucas stood frozen. He couldn't process what he'd just heard. His father blinked rapidly, his lips trembling, trying to form words but failing. I don't know what to say," Miguel finally whispered, his voice cracking. "You don't have to say anything," Ethan said gently. He turned to Lucas and crouched slightly so they were eye level. "You didn't just return a wallet, Lucas. You returned hope. You reminded me that doing the right thing doesn't depend on wealth, age, or where you come from. It depends on who you choose to be." Lucas nodded slowly, still stunned. Then, from behind him, a tiny voice piped up. "Do we get a prize too?" Mateo asked with wide, curious eyes. Laughter rippled through the room. Ethan chuckled, reaching out a hand to touzle Mateo's dark curls. "Well, I think brave siblings deserve a tour of our robot lab. What do you think?" The triplets lit up instantly, their eyes wide with wonder. Isla grabbed Rosa's hand and squealed, "Like real robots?" "Real ones," Ethan said with a wink. As an assistant escorted the children toward the innovation wing, Ethan placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder. "I'd like to offer your family more than just a scholarship. You've raised a remarkable son. I want to help you all get a fresh start in San Francisco, housing, a job, a future. Miguel's lips trembled again. But I don't want to take advantage. You're not, Ethan interrupted, his tone serious. You're accepting an opportunity you've already earned, through honesty, hard work, and the way you've raised your kids. We need more families like yours in this world. The room quieted again as Ethan turned back to the crowd. This company was built on technology, but our future depends on people. Lucas and his family remind us what really matters. Let's never forget that. As applause thundered again, Miguel wiped his eyes. He looked over to see Isla waving excitedly from behind a glass wall, a robot arm moving in front of her. Rosa clapped gleefully, and Mateo seemed to be negotiating with an engineer about pushing a red button. Lucas stood close to Ethan now, trying to understand Are you sure about this? He asked quietly, almost afraid to believe. Ethan knelt beside him, speaking just loud enough for him to hear. Lucas, when I was your age, I was angry. Lost. I didn't believe the world had room for people like me to do good. But someone gave me a chance. And now I get to do the same for you. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. He didn't care about money or headlines. He just wanted to make something of this chance. Not just for himself, but for his dad. For Isla, Rosa, and Mateo. For kids who didn't have enough, but gave more than most people ever could. He nodded. I won't let you down. I know, Ethan smiled. Later that afternoon, as the Rivera family sat together in the company lounge, eating sandwiches and watching the triplets show off their new robot drawings, Lucas sat back, heart full. A week ago, he had found a wallet. He had no idea it would lead to this. Sometimes, the smallest decisions reveal the biggest truths. And sometimes, the simplest act of honesty unlocks a future too good to be true, except that it is. Because it's real. And it's just the beginning. The San Francisco skyline explored a soft golden glow as the sun began to set, long shadows falling on the vented high-rises and winding streets below. Ethan Carlisle stood by the window of his penthouse office, holding a warm cup of coffee he hadn't yet reached. He wasn't thinking about coins or stocks or venture capital deals. He was thinking about Lucas, and the ripple effects of a single act of integrity. It had been 2 weeks since the boy had returned the briefcase. 2 weeks since the quiet taxi driver and his bright-eyed son had shown him what decency looked like in its purest form. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the way Lucas's small hands gripped the briefcase, the way his voice trembled not with fear, but with moral certainty. And the way Miguel, his father, stood behind him, silent, proud. But there was more. The next morning, he called his assistant. Find me a place, he said. A 2-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood. Close to schools, clean, quiet. Make it happen. Within 72 hours, a modest but warm apartment on the city's south side was ready. Fresh paint. Clean linens. A stack of coloring books and a twin bunk bed for the triplets. A new desk for Lucas. Groceries in the fridge. Nothing fancy, but everything needed to start over. Miguel couldn't believe it when the call came. At first, he thought it was a mistake. You want me to supervise transportation? He repeated, eyes wide. Sir, I haven't worked in an office. I only drive. You do more than drive, Ethan said. You raise good people. You work hard. I trust you. You'll learn the rest. Miguel sat stunned. Across the room, Rosa tugged at his sleeve, whispering, Papi, can we really go live in that place with the yellow flowers on the windows? Lucas had overheard too, and his voice wavered. You mean we don't have to stay in the motel anymore? No, Ethan replied softly. You're going home. They moved in on a Saturday. The triplets burst into their new room, Isla spinning in a circle with her arms out, Rosa flinging herself onto the bunk bed and shouting, We have stairs. even though it was a single-floor apartment. Mateo sat cross-legged on the rug, staring wide-eyed at the row of books Ethan had picked out himself, beginner readers and picture books with dogs, dinosaurs, and space adventures. Lucas stood in the doorway of his room, silent. A single tear rolled down his cheek. "I've never had a desk before," he whispered. Miguel kept thanking Ethan, shaking his hand every few minutes. But Ethan, unshaven for once, eyes tired but soft, only said, "Just raise them like you've been doing. That's all I ask." And he meant it. But his involvement didn't end there. On Monday morning, Miguel reported to Ethan's local warehouse for his first day as a transportation supervisor. He wore a second-hand button-up shirt and carried a notebook he had bought at the dollar store. Ethan walked him in personally, introduced him to the staff, and stayed for 2 hours to make sure Miguel felt welcomed. By midweek, Miguel was reviewing delivery routes and assigning shifts. His co-workers respected him. He was organized, humble, and had a quiet authority about him. And he never stopped asking questions, determined to learn everything he could. It was hard work, but it was dignity. Meanwhile, Ethan couldn't stop checking in, personally. He'd drop by the apartment with pastries. He'd bring art supplies for the girls. He took Lucas to a bookstore one evening and let him pick out 3 novels. "Only 3?" Lucas asked with a grin. "Better make them count." Sometimes, he stayed long enough to help the kids with homework. One rainy Thursday, Ethan walked into the apartment and found all 4 kids piled under a blanket on the couch, watching an old cartoon on a tiny screen. There was barely room for him, but they made space. "Mr. Ethan," Rosa asked sleepily, her head on his arm, "do you have brothers?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I used to," he replied. "But not anymore." "Then you can borrow us," Mateo offered, serious. "Only on weekends." And Ethan laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. As the weeks passed, their bond deepened. It was no longer about a wallet or a reward. It was about family, one found, not born. The Rivera's brought life into Ethan's world of boardrooms and silence. In return, he gave them stability and respect. But one night, after dinner, Ethan pulled Lucas aside. "You know why I did all this, right?" he asked. Lucas shrugged. "Because I gave your wallet back?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "No. Because you reminded me what it means to be a good man. Something I forgot along the way." Lucas looked up, confused. "You're a good man. You help us." Ethan's throat tightened. "Maybe I'm learning again. From you." That night, as Ethan walked to his car, he paused at the door. Inside, the triplets were dancing in their pajamas, Miguel was washing dishes, and Lucas was reading to Mateo in bed. A stream of light poured in from the windows, golden and warm. It wasn't a mansion. But it was the richest home Ethan had ever lived in. And in that moment, he realized, returning the briefcase wasn't the story. The real story was how the briefcase was returned to him. It had been nearly 7 months since the autumn day Lucas Rivera had picked up a forgotten leather briefcase from the back of his father's old taxi. The leaves had changed color twice since then, and Silvergrove had quietly transitioned into spring, the streets blooming with lilacs and the sound of morning chatter. But there was something different in the air that morning. At Lila's Corner Cafe, the town's unofficial gossip hub, a loud clang of a ceramic coffee cup broke the usual breakfast buzz. Mr. Dalton, the retired mailman, had just slammed down the latest edition of the Silvergrove Herald and gasped, his mustache twitching. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, waving the paper as half the cafe turned. His eyes widened. "He's on the front page." Everyone leaned in, and there it was in bold ink, just under the masthead. "The boy who returned a briefcase to a billionaire now has a future funded by kindness." Beneath the headline, a large photo shows 12-year-old Lucas Rivera, wearing a tailored suit, standing proudly in front of a sleek glass building in San Francisco. His big brown eyes are filled with wonder. Behind him, Ethan Carlisle, the reclusive tech billionaire whose wallet changed everything, rests his hand on Lucas's shoulder. But what makes the photo even more poignant is the sight of three younger children standing in front of Lucas, holding his hands: Isla and Rosa, his twin sisters with matching pigtails, and Mateo, the youngest, with his thumb in his mouth, looking up at his brother as if he were a superhero. By noon, every copy of the paper had sold out. Shop owners left "back in 10" signs just to rush down to Lila's to see the article themselves. And across town, at the Rivera home, things were quieter, but far more emotional. Miguel Rivera, Lucas's father, sat on the couch in their tiny living room, the newspaper folded neatly on his lap. His calloused hands trembled slightly as he reread the headline. Beside him, Lucas bounced Mateo gently on his lap while Rosa and Isla tugged at the oversized sleeves of his hoodie. "Lucas," Miguel said softly, his voice rough, "you've made this town proud. But more than that, you've made your family believe in something again." Lucas didn't say anything for a moment. His eyes were fixed on the framed photo of their late mother on the shelf. "I just did what she would have wanted me to do," he whispered. "She always said honesty is how we build bridges, right?" Isla chimed in, her voice high and hopeful. "Yeah," Rosa added, wrapping her arms around Lucas's waist. "And now you built one all the way to San Francisco." Lucas laughed, ruffling her hair. "Guess I did." The triplets had been too young to really understand what had happened last fall, but now, with their big brother suddenly being invited to tour schools in California, and Mr. Carlisle himself video calling the family every few weeks, it was becoming real. Too real. But the truth was, things hadn't magically become easy after the wallet. Miguel had hesitated at first to accept anything from Ethan Carlisle. He was a proud man, raised with old-school values. He didn't want charity. But Ethan had been persistent, not with money, but with belief. He told Miguel, "I'm not doing this out of guilt. I'm doing it because your son reminded me that goodness still exists. He reminded me who I was before I got rich." Ethan had flown the Riveras out to San Francisco twice already. The first time, Lucas had gotten to sit in on a real engineering lab meeting and sketch ideas for a bridge design. The second time, Ethan took them to the top floor of his headquarters and presented Lucas with a letter, a full scholarship to any STEM-focused school of his choice, mentorship by Ethan's lead designers, and a grant for his family to move to the city, should they ever choose to. But what hit hardest wasn't the opportunity. It was what Ethan said to the triplets during that second visit. He had knelt down in front of them, suit and all, and said, "You three, you keep this guy grounded, all right? Big brothers can forget what matters when they grow up." Mateo had stared at Ethan, then pointed at the billionaire's shiny black shoes. "Do you have robot shoes?" Everyone had burst into laughter. Back in Silver Grove now, Lucas was folding up the newspaper and slipping it gently into the same drawer where they kept his mother's letters. There was a knock at the door. When Miguel opened it, he was surprised to see Ms. Darlene, the school principal, standing there with a wide smile. "Miguel, Lucas," she said, "the town's organizing a little celebration tonight. Nothing fancy, but we thought, well, it's not every day we get a hero in our midst." Lucas blushed and looked at his feet. That night, the community center filled with the scent of potluck dishes, old record players, and laughter. The mayor made a short speech, calling Lucas a reflection of Silver Grove's soul. But the most emotional moment came when Lucas was asked to speak. He stood up nervously, glancing at the crowd. "I didn't return the wallet to get a reward," he began. "I just thought about how scared I'd be if I lost mine. And I thought about what my mom would say. She'd say, 'Do the right thing even if no one is watching.'" He paused, voice trembling. "But someone was watching, Mr. Carlisle. And he didn't just give me a future. He gave my whole family something we hadn't had since my mom died, hope." There were sniffles in the room, and then a standing ovation. Isla, Rosa, and Mateo ran up and hugged him as soon as he stepped off the stage. "Can we go to your school when we grow up too?" Rosa asked, her eyes sparkling. Lucas nodded. "If you keep brushing your teeth and being kind, absolutely." From the back of the room, Miguel watched with tears streaming down his face. He didn't need money. He didn't need fame. What he had was more valuable: a son who had become a symbol of quiet courage, and 3 little ones who believed goodness could change the world. That night, as the stars blinked over Silvergrove and laughter spilled out of the community center's windows, Lucas walked outside for a moment of quiet. He pulled the newspaper out of his pocket one last time and read the headline again. The boy returned the leather briefcase to the billionaire whose future was funded by kindness. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mom, I hope you're proud." And in the stillness of the night, he felt it. She was. The San Francisco skyline shimmered behind the glass walls of the Carlyle Foundation Hall, where over 300 guests gathered for a black-tie charity gala to celebrate Ethan Carlyle's 45th birthday. Journalists mingled near the entrance, snapping photos of tech giants, philanthropists, and celebrities walking the crimson carpet. But it wasn't the guest list that made the night special. It was the presence of one modest family from Silvergrove, seated near the front table, Miguel Rivera and his 4 children. Ethan had never been one for parties. In the past, birthdays came and went like meetings, efficient, forgettable. But this year was different. This year, everything had changed because of one wallet, one boy, and one moment that shattered the walls he'd built around himself. The room dimmed as soft piano music faded. A spotlight warmed the stage. Ethan stepped into view, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, no tie, sleeves slightly rolled, a nod to his signature work ethic. The crowd quieted. He took a breath, eyes locking on the table where Lucas sat in a navy blue suit, looking proud but humble, his triplet siblings Isla, Rosa, and Mateo perched beside him like curious sparrows. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Ethan began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "When I was a kid, birthdays weren't celebrated. My mom worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. So when I became successful, I made a rule: no birthdays, no distractions. Just progress." There was polite laughter from the audience. "But a few months ago," he continued, "I took a detour to a town called Silvergrove. I left something behind, a wallet, yes, but more than that, I left behind the man I had become. Cold. Disconnected. Busy chasing everything but meaning." His voice grew quieter, more reflective. He told the whole story with admiration, mixed with respect and love. The emotional story ended with a spontaneous round of applause that echoed throughout the room. Ethan stepped back slightly, then added, "I've built companies. I've earned billions. But those small hands returning my wallet? That was the moment I found something priceless." Cameras flashed. The spotlight warmed his face. But his eyes never left the Rivera family. "And to celebrate that," Ethan said, gesturing to the giant screen behind him, "tonight I'm announcing the Rivera Scholarship Fund, dedicated to kids like Lucas, and Isla, and Rosa, and Mateo, who may not have much, but who have hearts of gold." A cheer erupted. The triplets gasped. Mateo tugged on Lucas's sleeve. "Did he say our names?" Lucas nodded, smiling. Later that evening, reporters huddled around Ethan as he made his way down the marble stairs to rejoin the family. One woman asked, "Mr. Carlyle, do you consider tonight your biggest career success?" Ethan glanced at Lucas, who was holding Isla's hand while she tried balancing a slice of chocolate cake on her tiny fork. Rosa had fallen asleep against Miguel's shoulder, and Mateo was trying to teach a waiter how to do a silly dance move. He smiled, shaking his head. "No," he said simply. "Tonight wasn't about career. It was about connection. And that boy over there, Lucas," he reminded me that life's biggest returns don't come from business deals. They come from choosing what's right, even when no one's looking. Another reporter chimed in, "So, what's next for you?" Ethan paused thoughtfully. "What's next? Building futures. Helping more kids. Maybe spending more afternoons with triplets who think I'm a king," he laughed. "That sounds like the kind of success I want to chase now." As the lights of the foundation hall shimmered and laughter echoed in the background, Ethan stepped off the platform and walked toward the Rivera family. Isla ran to him first, arms wide open. "You came back," she giggled. He scooped her up. "I never really left." The sun was beginning to dip below the rooftops of San Francisco's quieter neighborhoods, casting a warm golden hue over the narrow streets and open spaces of Presidio Park. It was a Saturday afternoon, cool, peaceful, and filled with the laughter of families, the call of birds returning to their nests, and the distant hum of a city that never quite quieted. Ethan Carlisle, a man whose weekends were filled with silence, emails, and empty wine glasses, was now walking along the winding path in the park, his heart fuller than it had been in years. With one hand he held Lucas's hand, and with the other Lucas gently held the hands of his 3 younger siblings, triplets with the same bright eyes, contagious giggles, and boundless curiosity. Their names were Isla, Rosa, and Mateo, and they were the definition of life. They moved as a small, joyful group, attracting smiles from passers-by. Rosa, with her curly blonde hair tied in uneven pigtails, skipped ahead and pointed at a cluster of balloons tied to a vendor's cart. Isla, ever the observant one, tightened her grip on Lucas's hand, her eyes flickering between the cotton candy machine and the ducks waddling near the pond. Mateo, sandwiched between his sisters, had one shoe untied and one hand clinging to a superhero figurine Ethan had gifted him earlier that morning. "Do you think ducks can eat popcorn?" Rosa asked, her voice high and sweet. "No, silly," Mateo answered matter-of-factly, "they like bread." "Only bread." "But Daddy says too much bread is bad for ducks," Isla chimed in, sounding genuinely concerned. Lucas chuckled, looking up at Ethan, who was already laughing quietly at the conversation. "You hear that?" Lucas said. "Triplets have debates now." Ethan nodded with a warm smile. "Honestly, I'd rather listen to them than a boardroom full of investors." For a man once surrounded by concrete, glass towers, and echoing penthouse walls, Ethan now found more meaning in the dirt beneath Mateo's sneakers and the sunlight caught in Isla's hair than in any financial report. He had spent years trying to outrun his own past, his loneliness, his mistrust, but these children, especially Lucas, had halted him mid-stride and turned his heart around. They stopped near a playground bench beneath a cherry blossom tree that had somehow bloomed early. Lucas helped Mateo tie his shoe, gently scolding him for running without watching. Isla sat beside Ethan, resting her head lightly on his arm, while Rosa climbed up to the back of the bench like a gymnast, yelling, "Look! I'm the queen of the park." Ethan laughed. It wasn't forced, it wasn't polite or dry like the ones he gave to clients, it was real. Deep. Healing. "Is it okay if we get ice cream later?" Lucas asked, almost hesitantly, still mindful of boundaries. Even after weeks of staying in Ethan's guest home, of having warm beds and hot meals, there was a part of Lucas that hadn't fully adjusted to kindness without conditions. "You don't have to ask," Ethan replied softly. "You're family now." Lucas looked at him, his expression caught between disbelief and gratitude. For a 12-year-old who had carried the weight of protecting 3 6-year-olds, that word, family, meant more than any dollar Ethan could ever give him. Just then, Mateo tugged at Ethan's pant leg. "Can I ride on your shoulders?" "Please." Ethan smiled and knelt down. "Hop on, champ." With an excited squeal, Mateo scrambled up, wrapping his little arms around Ethan's forehead like handlebars. Isla clapped and said, "Next is me." "No, me." Rosa shrieked. "Ladies, one at a time," Ethan laughed, rising with Matteo on his back. As they walked further down the path, the triplets started singing a made-up song about ducks, sunshine, and ice cream. Lucas joined in halfway, his voice a little louder, a little freer. Ethan didn't sing, but he listened. He listened so intently it almost hurt, because he knew these were the moments he had once thought were lost to him forever. They passed a group of teenagers playing basketball, a couple holding hands, and an older man feeding pigeons from a bench. And yet, for Ethan, the world shrunk down to the five of them, this beautiful, chaotic little tribe he never saw coming. He thought back to that day in Silvergrove. How close he had come to losing his wallet, and how, in that near loss, he had gained everything. At the top of a small hill near the fountain, they sat together, Matteo now dozing off on Ethan's shoulder, Isla laying across Lucas's lap, and Rosa digging through her tiny backpack for a crumpled drawing she wanted to show him. "Do you think it's okay we have days like this?" Lucas asked quietly. "What do you mean?" Ethan asked, brushing Matteo's hair back gently. "Like, happy days. With fun. Ice cream. Like we're normal." Lucas's voice trembled, but not out of fear, out of hope. Ethan reached over and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Lucas, you've earned every single one of these days. So have Isla, Rosa, and Matteo. There's nothing not normal about being happy." Lucas nodded slowly. "Okay," he whispered, but it sounded more like a promise to himself. The sun dipped further, casting long shadows that danced like memories across the grass. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of laughter, birds, and triplet chatter wash over him like a blessing. This was life. Not the sterile offices. Not the press releases or quarterly projections. But this, 3 giggling kids, 1 resilient older brother, and the unexpected joy of holding someone else's heart in your hands. And as they walked home that evening, sticky from melted ice cream and tired from laughter, Ethan knew one thing with absolute clarity. His real life has begun. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.